Hello, thank you for watching. This is On Purpose Astrology, and I'm Mandy Luckley. And today I'm going to be talking about the new moon in Scorpio, which falls on November the 1st. It's an intense period. If you're watching this after the 1st of November, it's still going to be irrelevant because I'm going to be talking about things that happen astrologically throughout November and also beyond. But to start looking at the new moon, which of course is the start of a new lunar cycle, a month long, around about a month long lunar cycle, let's just share my screen so that you can see the chart for the new moon as I talk through it. For those of you who read charts, can read charts, or want to sort of have some practice in reading charts. I know a lot of my subscribers and viewers here are seasoned astrologers, so it's always good to put a chart up. But I always like to find a sort of a thematic name for every video that I do, and this one is intensity and strength. And of course, anyone knows anything about Scorpio, you'll know that these are relevant to that sign. But let's have a little look at the chart now for this new moon in Scorpio. So we've got the new moon in Scorpio here. It's at 9 degrees of Scorpio, 35 minutes. So just 9.5 degrees of Scorpio, basically. It falls in the ninth house of this chart. Likelihood it'll fall in a different house in your own chart. I always set the chart for London because it's my default setting. It's where I live. So we can kind of discount at the moment the house placements here. So what is in basic level, what is a new moon in Scorpio all about? Well, I've already said intensity and strength. It's an emotionally strong sign. At least that's the purpose of Scorpio, to build emotional strength. The opposite side of Taurus can be about building physical strength and physical structures, whereas Scorpio is about, as I said, that emotional strength. So this is what we are going to be perhaps learning a little bit about during this new lunar cycle of a month. You know, the sign of the new moon always sets the tone for the 1 month lunar cycle, of course. So it's also interesting because if you've watched the last video, and I'll touch on quite a few things here now, but we see in the sky, and I put the little arrows there to the first house and the seventh house. We have an ongoing, incredibly intense Mars opposition Pluto in Capricorn at the intense degree, which is a 29 degree of any sign, is a very intense degree. So we can see that intensity that has been building. And as we start a new cycle, we can think about where we might get some relief from that intensity, where we can step into our power. Power is a strong word for Pluto, for example, and how we can act in integrity. Integrity is really important to Scorpio. So how can we step into our power? How can we shed any feelings of powerlessness? How can we step into our power with integrity? And another reason why this Mars-Pluto opposition, as I say, I've talked about it in other videos. I'm sure you're watching other astrology videos that have talked in length about different aspects of Mars opposite Pluto. It's a difficult and an intense energy. Scorpio it's Scorpio's ruler traditionally is Mars, and Scorpio's ruler in modern astrology is Pluto. So you can see how this new moon really plugs in, even though there might not be an exact aspect between the new moon and Mars and Pluto. You can see how it plugs in. And I've talked about triggers, emotional triggers in previous videos, Mars being something to do with triggers. So there's very much a protective, defensive energy. So Mars works differently. Mars is about how you act and how you assert yourself, how you protect yourself and defend yourself. And it's about your desires and how you go for what you want. It's also about what might anger you, what might trigger you. So Mars in Cancer is more on the defensive side. How do you protect yourself? So you might feel that need to kind of protect yourself. There might be fear there. When we have Mars Pluto together, there's always some kind of fear there, and you're tapping into that intensity. The new moon, of course, is where things are dark. Okay, so physically in the sky, you can't see the moon when there's a new moon. It's the dark of the moon. So it's a time really to pause. Things that might be going on, these intense situations in your emotions or in your life that might be going on. If you can, during this full moon period, I'm recording this on the 30th, so the 30th really until the 2nd of November. If you can take a pause to relax, to rest, okay, don't get into a fight with yourself emotionally or with anyone else if you can at all help it. What happens at a new moon tends to prevail, what unfolds, I should say, at a new moon, because we don't know what's going on. We don't know, we can't see everything. Things will be revealed as the moon moves through its monthly cycle to the square aspect, when things become, oh, okay, this is what I need to sort out. And then the peak, when we can see a lot or see almost everything sometimes, when the full moon a couple of weeks later, which will be the 15th of November. So it's the start of that new cycle, where you might feel like you need to defend yourself, to protect yourself, but instead of being passive aggressively defensive, it might be time to go into that Cancerian shell a little bit to rest. I always say rest at the full moon, sorry, the new moon, rest at the new moon. I think that's really important. Sometimes lifestyle gets in the way. We all have to go to work. We all have responsibilities. But we are helped here by a trine from the new moon to Saturn in Pisces. Now, a trine is, an easier aspect. It gives us the opportunity to use Saturn in a very positive way. So when I talk about resting and giving yourself a little bit of healthy protection, Saturn helps us to set those boundaries, those emotional and physical boundaries, which can help with protection. Interestingly, the Saturn energy used well can be quite a grounding energy. So when you get into your head, it's easy to sort of get into your head. I know we're talking about the water signs here, Scorpio and Pisces, with Saturn in Pisces, but it's easy to sort of get into your head and overthink things, overanalyze things. Scorpio, so with this moon and sun in a new moon in Scorpio, there is a tendency to overanalyze things, to sort of really dig deep. This is the essence of Scorpio, kind of digging deep. You can dig deep in a kind of protective shell for the next few days, if that's at all possible. And grounding, as I was just alluding to, Saturn can help us to ground. And you might say, how can Saturn in Pisces, the water sign, help us to ground? Saturn's more associated with Capricorn, isn't it? That's the sign where it's one of its strongest placements when it's in Capricorn, which is one of the earth signs. How I would suggest grounding might be facilitated is to keep hydrated, to stay hydrated. That might sound counterintuitive, grounding by staying hydrated, but hydration actually can help to keep you grounded. Sometimes when you are you are a little bit dehydrated, it can feel anxious, it can put you in your head, it can make you feel ungrounded. So make sure during this time of the new moon, make sure you are hydrated. Make sure you have some access to water other than just drinking water. Perhaps you could have like a salt bath or something like that. That's another great thing. So the salt baths or salt scrubs are really good for Saturn in Pisces. As I say, it's a trine aspect. So this is an aspect that we can use to sort of help us. So at this time, it is really about being in your integrity. I've already said that Mars and Pluto are connected by rulership to this new moon. And it's about how you act in your power, whether you act in your power. You have more power, we all have more power than we actually believe that we have. And it can be that you feel a little bit powerless, or you want to assert your power, even if it's in a defensive way, to protect yourself from something, to get in there first, to protect you from whatever perceived fear there might be. What's crucial is to be in your own integrity, to be in your own truth. This is another theme for Scorpio. Scorpio wants to know the truth. We might not be able to perceive the truth, the whole truth and everything, but everything, all the truth on a new moon. But we are working towards finding out how things really are, what's really going on under the surface, which is a very Scorpionic and Plutonian thing. What's going on under the surface will eventually come to light. So think about this new moon as the start of the 28-29 day cycle of this lunar cycle, rather than just like it's happening now and then the energies are lost. No, they're going to be going through this whole cycle of the next month or so. The full moon on the 15th of November is what's known as a beaver moon. So by the time we're a few days out from the Scorpio new moon, will be a time to start preparing for the season to come. It's kind of a seasonal change period at the moment. If you're in the northern hemisphere, we're going into winter soon, and then we're going into summer if you're in the southern hemisphere. And the beaver moon, think about busy as a beaver, busy preparing for the season ahead. So after you feel a little bit more replenished and you have a little bit more information, you have a little bit more insight and intuition, which is another great Scorpionic thing to think about, intuition and insight, then that's the time to start preparing for whatever you need to do, whatever resources you need to sort of gather. If you're thinking about the holiday season, if it's Thanksgiving, if it's Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever holidays, religious or otherwise, that you honor in this last part of this year. Think about what preparation resources, but also think about your physical and emotional resources, going back to taking the rest that you need. Now, later on in November, on the 20th, 19th, 20th November, as I'm sure you know if you follow astrology, because this is the long-awaited astrological change, is that Pluto finally settles into Aquarius. So it goes to 0 degrees of Aquarius, and it's not this time going back into Capricorn. It's been in Aquarius a couple of times and it's gone back again. 20th of November. So there might be a sense of a release of energy, a relief of energy, even a relief of intensity. But Pluto's always intense, so there's going to be an intensity of a different flavor, of a different kind. But we're going to see Pluto in Aquarius for the next 20 years. So it's a slow process. If we think about the 15 odd years that Pluto was in Capricorn, the slow process of change. So we're going to see that slow process. You might have seen, you might be thinking, oh, everything's going to sort of be revolutionary change and everything's going to be changing and better and for the people and more democracy and more fairness and all these Aquarian kind of themes. But these things don't happen overnight. But there's kind of a sense of those shifting sands. If you're very sensitive to energies, you're going to sense that feel of that shifting sands that might be a little bit familiar. You might have had similar senses of these kind of shifts when Pluto dipped into Aquarius previously, but now we can kind of start to settle into that energy. So what else can I tell you really about this? I've talked about grounding and I've talked about hydration. The other thing to think about with Scorpio and its Mars, traditional Mars rulership, and this Mars-Pluto opposition, is to look at your own Mars in your own chart, because even if this Mars-Pluto opposition, or even if this new moon doesn't connect directly to one of your planets in your natal chart or your angles in your natal chart. By the way, if you don't have your natal chart, you can download a free one from astro.com or alabe.com. As usual, I always say that. But if you still trigger these intense aspects, Mars-Pluto will trigger your own Mars, wherever your Mars is, whether your Mars is in Gemini, Aries, Capricorn, Sagittarius, or whatever your Mars happens to be in your natal chart. It will trigger whatever your Mars, or it can trigger whatever your Mars means natally to you, because it's a strong Martian energy, especially, as I said, with Pluto intensity, the new moon intensity, and also being at the last degree of its sign intensity, a lot of intensity. particularly if you have a Mars Pluto, any kind of Mars Pluto aspect in your own chart. So think about those emotional triggers. Think about where you might feel powerless, where you might feel afraid, where you might feel as if things are working against you and you're not quite sure where things are going. A little bit of uncertainty and that anxiety around uncertainty, because that's where anxiety comes from, isn't it? It's that uncertainty and not feeling in control. And Pluto is where you feel like you want to feel in control. It sounds a bit trite to say be patient during this new moon, but that really comes into that kind of taking a pause if you can, taking a rest if you can, taking a little break if you can from sort of going forward, because there will be time when things are going to become a lot clearer. So what else is going on in this chart? I talked about the new moon in that trine to Saturn and how that can be helpful. That trine as well can be about helping. I've already talked about helping you to set the boundaries that you need to just to protect yourself from energies that you feel might be a little bit toxic for you right now. If this is the case, if you are feeling that, not everyone is. In the collective, of course, we can feel the intensity in the collective. We have, for example, the on the 5th of November, we have the American election. There's a lot of intensity around that and a lot of division between the different parties and the supporters of the different parties. So there's a lot of fear around that. Again, try and just breathe and try and not connect. Try not to connect if you can into any fear there might be around what's going to happen. What will be will be. Do whatever you can. If you're a voter, vote for who you feel in your heart is the right candidate. But try not to plug into the conflict and the fear and the you're right and I'm wrong, that kind of thing. That's what I would definitely suggest anyway, generally. We also have, you can see here, I haven't put little arrows there, but you can see in house 11 in blue, you've got Venus in Sagittarius, which is opposite Jupiter in Gemini, and Jupiter's going backwards towards that Venus there. So what is this all about? Well, Venus is obviously about love and relationships. Of course, it's always about that. It's about where we give and yield and want to cooperate. It's a cooperative, at best, it's a cooperative energy. And Jupiter in Gemini is how we communicate our values, what we believe in, our core beliefs and our core values. And Venus is also something about our values and our belief and our perspective on things. Both Jupiter and the sign of Sagittarius, where Venus sits, has a lot to do with perspective. So this can help us see the perspective. As I said, the new moon is when the moon is together and with the sun, and you can't see the moon. It's hidden, it's dark. Whereas when you have an opposition, which we have here, as I said, between Venus and Jupiter, you will see that, you will see, you might take in that dark time, in that rest time, in that time of pause. It might be something useful to contemplate. What are your values? What's your perspective on things that are happening in your own life and in your own world and in your communities and in general in human consciousness? What are your thoughts? Where do your thoughts go when things happen? When things happen that might not be welcome, or even what happens when things are welcome, where do your thoughts go? And how does that relate to your belief system, the belief systems that you've grown up with, which are to do with, your own experience, how you were brought up, the culture, the religion, and all these aspects of your life, where you belong as well, where you feel a sense of belonging. So there is something to think about as well, because when we are strong in our belief system and we act with that integrity I talked about, that is where we can really start to help ourselves to feel as if we are really stepping into our power. We talk about Pluto being about our own power. And we also have Mercury in an opposition to Uranus here in this chart. So you can see Mercury there in Scorpio, 28th Scorpio, right at the top of the chart, opposite the Uranus in Taurus there at the bottom. That's actually passing out. We've had that opposition sort of towards the end of October. That's kind of passing out now, but you might still be feeling a little bit energized, innovated by thoughts and ideas. Can be quite an exciting thing. It can be kind of a bit discombobulating, or also, excuse me, a little bit exciting as well. If you look back over the last few weeks, certainly we've had, things coming out in the collective, which are ideas and words and thoughts that have perhaps been shocking, and that's a reflection of that Mercury Uranus, and that is passing out now. And one more thing perhaps to mention is you can see here Uranus, we're talking about Uranus as well. There is a trine aspect to Pluto. It's not perfected. It's not perfected yet, so it's kind of coming in. But those energies, I mean, there's a 4-degree orb, just over a 4-degree orb. So those energies are going to be starting to come in as well. Uranus, Pluto energies. It's the opening trine of the cycle of Uranus, Pluto, that began in the 1960s, around 1965, when it was exact. So it's one of these very slow collective cycles. And the opening trine is where we start to have opportunity, where we can start to be creative in the way collectively that we do things. Whenever you hear myself or any astrologist talk about it's the opening trine or the opening square or the opening sextile, what that basically means, it's the first sextile, the first square, the first trine, etc., of that cycle. So since the conjunction when they were together, so that 1965 Uranus-Pluto conjunction I just talked about, opening square, when things are still literally opening up, those opportunities are opening up, they're still working on what the themes collectively and also individually, if it touches our chart, we're working on the themes that are enveloped by that current cycle. And they're all, any opening aspect, it means it's an aspect that happens before the opposition. The opposition, just like a full moon, is when things are peak. So then you'll have the closing, when the closing squares, sextiles, trines, etc., which is when things start to get sort of wrapped up and cleaned up and sorted out, and things start to sort of manifest and working gradually towards completion, to go to the process of the next conjunction. So I hope that makes sense. But what does this trine mean that's coming up? Well, it's going to be with us for a few years. As I say, it's going to be moving into the air signs, because we've already established, Pluto is very soon going into Aquarius on 19th to 20th of November this year, 2024. And then next year, Uranus will be going into Gemini. So we're really going in, and with Sedna there as well. Sedna is also going to be there, which is really interesting. Sedna is one of the dwarf planets. You can see her here at 0 Gemini at the bottom of this chart, right next to Uranus here. So Sedna is very important as well to this pattern. She's about our consciousness in dreaming, our consciousness in environmental issues, how we look after our waters and all that kind of thing. I'll probably talk a lot more about that in other videos as we go along, but something to bear in mind, Sedna, just to get that in her, how are we feeling abandoned in how we connect with ourselves and with our planet, and how do we turn that into something beautiful and divine? As I say, there's a lot more to be said about that. I've been a bit being a bit obtuse here, but we will talk about that. But to go back to that Uranus-Pluto trine. So the Uranus-Pluto cycle is very much associated with revolution. Actual revolutions, it's associated with the French Revolution, the American Revolution, but also collective revolution of consciousness, revolution of ideas of freedom, of democracy. And I think this particular cycle and this particular trine gives us some insight into where we can become our own authority and our own step into our own power and step into our own authority. So again, we have all these converging themes that are going on. It's also a revolution, I think, in we're going into the air signs. We're very much in the air signs going forward, collectively when we're in the air signs, because with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction of 2020, which is still the cycle that we're in. Again, I've done lots of videos about that. You can look them up. Has gone into the so-called air mutation, which means all the conjunctions for the rest of our lifetime, for the next 200 or so years, are going to be all the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn are going to be in the air signs. So, and again, then we have Uranus in an air sign, Saturn's now in an air sign, Pluto's going into an air sign. So we're going to have an air epoch, or you know, for the next few years, certainly. So this is all about. I honestly believe that these, when we go into air, we're going to have a lot more talk about consciousness. What is human consciousness? What is it? Is it in the brain? Is it just the mind, or is it more than that? And how are we all connected collectively? The collective consciousness. Maybe even we will, through a convergence of science, of psychology, of spirituality, we might even be able to come up with some answers. And what is consciousness? What does it mean? And how can we use it? Okay. Uranus always wakes up and shakes up things. Pluto always intensifies things. So we've got that sort of energy coming in. Also feel that more and more, and we've seen a lot of this already, that we're going to have a lot more awareness of our gut and how our gut works, how our gut has a consciousness, how our gut has its own kind of gut brain. We already know that there are, you know, the gut sends messages to our brain, to our actual brain, that kind of gut brain sort of connection there. You know, if we have an unhealthy gut biome, we can have, you know, mental health problems. Is more and more, this is becoming very much a thing in science, that scientists and the medical profession are really starting to realize this and starting to sort of communicate this to us. So that's really important. But the other thing I think that can really help us, I've talked about sort of hydration for this current period. I mean, generally anyway, keeping hydrated. But I think focusing on breathing and the breath work, and you know, there's all sorts of kind of breath work you can do, pranayama and yoga and all sorts of breath work, but conscious breathing, I think, can really help us. Conscious breathing is something that can really help us as well. So that's something to think about sort of as we go along, taking the much bigger picture and the wider perspective. But wishing you a wonderful, wonderful November. It's Halloween tomorrow as I'm recording this, so happy Halloween to those of you that celebrate Halloween. And it's just always a pleasure to do these videos and to share them with you. And do subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment if you feel inclined to do so. And I always send these videos out with love, and I always send it with good, hopeful optimism that these energies are going to be, that you can work with these energies in favorable ways, in ways that can help yourself, other people, and mankind. So lots of love and namaste to you all. Thank you.